Hello everyone, hope you're all doing well. Going to be doing a video today on the best cabins in Crossout. I figured because of the energy changes that came in a couple of weeks ago, that a pretty relevant video, and that I would give my opinions on the different cabins in the game. It's going to be Clan Wars focused for the most part, or like I suppose you could say competitively focused for the most part. And I'm going to do the exact same thing I did for weapons, whereby I'm just going to go through each of the cabins, say if they're good, if they're bad, if they're bad at everything, I'll tell you that. If they're good at something, I'll tell you what it is and what builds you would suit them on. But for the most part, I'm going to ignore specials and downs, so specials, blues, and whites, just because at that point in the game, if you're using a special cabin, you're not using spiders or hovers or anything. You just got it on the dogs, so the cabins don't really matter for the most part. Epics is where you get into it. Epics and legendaries, of course. So that's what I'm going to do. And also, before I start, actually, I was going to show or do a build through of my porcupine hovers last weekend, but I completely forgot to put it in the video. So I will put that in tomorrow, no, Sunday's video. I'll put at the very end. I'll put in a build through of my various porcupine builds. Because yeah, they're pretty decent, I think. Anyway, let's go into the cabins. I'll do it in the same order by column, so like that, and tell you what they're good at and what they're bad at. Right, so firstly, we got Dusk, which is just for those rocket players who don't want to aim. It's terrible. Don't bother with it. Don't use rockets in this game. It defeats the purpose of the game if you just look at someone for a second and then click a button and you shoot rockets into the air, because they don't do any damage. Basically, the devs know that drones and homing rockets don't require any skills, so they've nerfed them to the point where they don't do any damage either. So it's just boring to play and not effective. So I don't even know why they're still in the game. Anyway, cockpit, that's a pretty good build, to be honest. If you're on breakers, if you want a breaker booster, so you run the cockpit with obviously two breakers or two hammers, I suppose. It's better with breakers, obviously. And two or three boosters. You don't see them much since the energy change update, just because boosters take a lot of energy, so they're not very competitive at the moment. But they're still somewhat decent. If you're a breaker player, you might want to get a cockpit cabin. Tusk is pointless. It's just for those joke around builds where you have like a Tusk at the front, all of your mass behind it, and you just ram people at low power score. It's not competitive in the slightest, but it's kind of fun if you want to like mess about, I guess. Blight is pretty good. It's a fire weapon booster. It just gives a flat damage buff. It's not as good as it used to be now, because since the energy change nerfs, and people sort of come to the realization that, like, if you want to blight, you only get what is a 20% damage buff, which is okay, but it's much better for a firebug most of the time to be on something like a griff and just hit the guy in the back, as opposed to be a blight and then he decloaks you easier, and you have to hit him in the front. But it's still good, to be fair. If you're looking for a carbon like blight is you're not gonna go wrong with it. Cerberus, not too great. You can have some gimmick builds where you'll have like a Cerberus and a couple of harvesters or lacerators at the front, but it's not too competitive. It's a very difficult cabin to work. I wouldn't waste my money on it. It's just one of those cabs where a bit of a joke around build, look like it's Tusk, to be honest. Torero, you don't see Torero builds at all. It's the power is too low for a hover. The mass is too low for anything like a spider or anything. So you've got to run on dogs. But if you're on a dog with machine guns, odds are you're not going to want that. So the accuracy buff isn't really going to help you, and your guns are going to be super squishy. So like machine gun dogs aren't meta in Clan Wars or high power score at all. So I wouldn't bother with the trio most of the time. The only thing I can think where the accuracy buff would help would be on a machine gun, like, I know an imp build if you want to mess around. But again, like, imp dogs aren't competitive because they lose their guns all the time, even with Fin Whale to protect them, and then they're going to lose guns all the time. So Torio's not very good. I wouldn't waste my coins on it. Deadman, Deadman's okay, but it's not too meta at the moment. It gives you a reload buff, but the mass is super low. So it was decent when it first came out back in the day, where you could use it on blue hovers. but it's only really decent on like super lightweight hover builds. You don't see dogs with dead man that are much good. So I wouldn't bother with it. Most people just run Hadron instead because now you'll get the same energy, and you run on red hovers since red hovers tend to be more competitive than blues. And yeah, it's just like a bad Hadron. I wouldn't recommend it. Catalina is still really good. You can run it on a hover build. It's got decent power. The output, enough of a power output to make it work. Um, they're really good on builds where you get high numbers generally. So like a Helican Catalina is fantastic because once you do 1,000 damage, you get a stack, and with Helicans, you do 1,000 damage with every salvo for the most part. So they're not very good on builds like Scorpions because Scorpions get low numbers. But any ranged build hover, that you get big numbers on, you might not necessarily be doing much damage. You just get a lot of numbers naturally. Then yeah, Catalina is pretty good. But yeah, they're pretty meta on Helican hovers. Manitao, not meta at all. Revolvers aren't very good in this game. You could, I wouldn't waste my coins on it. If someone with a lot of coins out there would try it on like a what's the energy revolver called? I have to find out. I can't remember. Athena, is that it? Is that Athena? I'm trying to remember. Athena. I know this game. Yeah, Athena. Like someone with a lot of coins out there might want to try on like an Athena hover or something, but for the most part, it's not worth wasting your coins on. Janabi, again, don't waste your coins on it for the most part. You only get a damage buff while drifting. The only time this has come in was the recent Battle for Uranium event where the guys in my clan on punny cars were running Janabi. Just because they were drifting all the time and running away, and it was a nice low power score cabin and fast. Kami is pretty good, to be fair, but it's not as meta as it used to be. Back in the day, you'd use it against firebugs, but they nerfed the perk quite heavily. It's only active for 4 seconds, and the cooldown is 16. So that means every 20 seconds you get 4 seconds of your perk, which isn't really enough to be worth it. I mean, there's good stats, there's good power, and there's good like mass for what it is for a cabin at light. But the perk isn't long enough for it to be worth it. It's only applicable if you get chased by like a firebug, or if you've got like a heat weapon shooting at you, like a destructor, say for example. Maybe a masto shooting at you, but even then a masto's going to hurt you if it hits you. So it's not worth it a lot of the times. Um, yeah, I wouldn't recommend buying this. I would pick a Griffin over this in most scenarios. So Harpy, again, it's a really light cab that buffs explosion damage, but the thing is, anything that does explosion damage, like say auto cannons, the heavy builds, so a Harpy doesn't really work. Cannon hovers, like Typhoons, are kind of just too heavy for a Harpy, to be honest, for it to be worth it. You're going to be super squishy. And yes, it's not worth it. It doesn't really mix. Like, it'd be a lot better, the Harpy, if it was like a medium carbon, just for the perk, because the guns that have explosion damage are just too heavy for it, for the most part. Griffin, that is probably the best light cab in the game, in my opinion, just because any hover team is very good against hovers, but any team in general, it's just really good to be able to hit the perk, be completely invisible, and just hit someone in the back. So a Griffin Firebug, which I run, can fight spiders, not particularly great, but it can fight spiders if it needs to, it can fight hovers if it needs to, it can fight dogs if it needs to. Obviously, if you're a Griffin Bug and you go front on front with a light Firebug, you're going to lose because he has no damage, but just that ability with a cloak, for example, to just hit a cloak, hit your perk so no one sees one there, and just come out of absolutely nowhere is just invaluable. Also, the perk's really good. It lasts for 11 seconds and has a 20-second cooldown, so it's up for a third of the time, as opposed to the Kami, which is up a fifth of the time. So yeah, it's also got really good mass, very, very good power. The reason I run Pork Griffin is just because of the power output. He's like an absolute fly on it. To the point where I had an unfused Griffin on Pork. So a Pork Griffin have an unfused cab, and I honestly thought about running in Clan Wars unfused just because the power output was so good. But yeah, it's my favorite light carbon in the game. It's very, very good. So I would get that if you could. And it's really cheap at the moment, actually, because there's a blueprint thing for them where people could get. So the crafting materials from are super cheap. So I would very much recommend it if you're looking for a legendary light carb, because the Kami is probably quite more expensive. Yeah, Necronos. Yes, he's like probably get nearly half the price. Werewolf is a terrible carbon, don't get it. It's just like a gimmick carb where you die, you have like a little explosive drone afterwards. But the explosive drone, like 99.9% of the times, won't do anything. And it's just not worth being on a crappy carb. Don't get that. Aggressor, also don't get that, it's stupid. Your perk charges if you're heading in a straight line, but you move the slightest bit left or right and it loses the charge, which is just dumb. So it's just not worth it in my opinion. Don't get the aggressor. Even on like a lance build, I wouldn't get it. Like Cronus is not very good just because of the situationalness of it. You need to be near a corpse to get the perk. It can work on certain builds. I got a clanmate who's running it on a Ripper dog, but the Rippers are very good for it because you don't need a oppressor for the turn in. They have very good health. You can run over like an Aegis or something. So it's one of the few exceptions, but for the most part, the guns you put on a Cronus just aren't worth putting it on. Also, the way it's built, the mounting points are just aren't very kind for getting multiple guns on the carb. It's just not really worth it most of the times, if I'm honest. But it's not terrible, but I wouldn't get it. I'd still go for a Griffin. Okay, that's light sorted. So go on to mediums now. Favorite I wouldn't bother with. The perk is decent if you're looking for machine guns that overheat, but just don't. I wouldn't, honestly. Whaler's very good if you're on a cannon build. This basically makes Typhoons competitive. Whaler from the Battle Pass Whaler, which was Dura Mass, is actually a very good dog build. Very, very good dog build. Put it with a like an oppressor or something, and it's going like 101. I think my Mastodon Whaler goes. It's very good mobility to the point where have I still got it? Yeah, so this goes 101. That's to the point where Firebug Blight will go 105. So if you're getting chased by a Firebug in this, you're at the point where he's not gaining on you close at all. And bear in mind, Firebugs don't have flashes often these days. So it's actually really good on a dog. And if you fuse it for power, it's pretty good on hover as well. So really like the Whaler. If you're running Typhoons, you have as if you're running a Typhoon or a Mastodon hover, then you're gonna want to be on Whaler. Also, Whaler Mastodon Dog is also pretty good, so I very much like this carbon. And if you're looking for a cannon guy who's not going to be on Spider, you want to get a Whaler. Howl is okay for what it is, but it's nothing special. The perk is decent. It's kind of like just a. You could run it on like a cheap dog build, to be honest. It wouldn't be terrible, but it's nothing special. It's just like a damage buff when you get close. You don't want to run on hovers, just dogs. But yeah, it's nothing great, to be honest. The Kensei, haven't used it enough to actually know, to be honest. You get a speed boost, but again, I don't see them ever, so I assume they're not that great. Ghost was pretty good before the end changes. It's decent on things like a Scorpion hover, or like the old Scorpion hovers with Yeti and whatnot. You could hit Yeti, go into cloak with a Scorpion Yeti. Jesus Christ, that's hard to say. Get up to full stacks, shoot twice, wait, and then shoot twice with the perk, once without the perk, and then go back into cloak and just cycle through that. They used to be really good on Scorpions. And you get like 680 damage, which is about a damage buff that Scorpions very much needed. That's not really possible now since the energy changes. The Ghost will have one less energy than, say, a legendary medium. Also, the Yeti costs like 3 energy, so you're not going to see that too often, but it used to be pretty good. Hippogriff, I probably wouldn't get if I was newer to the game. Hippogriff, I wouldn't bother with at all. You can just run a, what's it called? Doppler. It's just it's just a Doppler carbon essentially, but it's nothing special. It's just kind of mediocre at everything. I wouldn't bother with it. Call is crap. It's just another one of those things that buffs drones, and who the hell wants to play drones? Same with this. I've never used it. I never want to use it. Don't use drones in this game. It defeats the purpose of this game if you use drones. Steppy Spider used to be really meta, really back in the day, just because he would buff spider leg speed. That was a long time ago at this point. Steppy Spider's not too great. You get the projectile speed for rockets, which is nice, if I'm honest. I think it's actually frontal, of course, rockets, frontal rockets. Is that code for Helicons? I wonder. I'll actually try to. Anyway, it's good. It buffs rockets, but it doesn't nerf their damage, and it's just not worth it a lot of the time. Plus, the cabin isn't really good, so it's too heavy and slow to be on a hover. You're not gonna run it on a dog because there are better things to use, and it's too light to be a spider. So cabin statistics just aren't very good. Master's pretty decent actually. If you're going like a dog build, like certain dog builds can do it. You go have like a breaker or something just because the guns heal. But it's only really good on dogs. Don't run them on hovers or spiders because again it's too slow to be a good hover build, a good hover cabin, sorry. And it's too small to be a good spider cabin. So you don't if you're running like a breaker dog or something along those lines, where you want the guns to heal, then yeah, you can run a master, but it's only good in that situation. Quantum it buffs energy damage, but you're gonna get hit and then you lose a perks. I won't get it, it's kind of pointless. Beholder is probably the first medium carbon that I would go for in the game if I was in it, just because it's just a good carbon. You can use it on hovers. You have a 5-second cloak, which does come in handy if you don't have the energy for a cloak. A 5-second cloak in Clan Wars can be quite useful. And it's good power, it has good mass, it's got like low weight. It's just a nice cabin for the most part. I'm a big fan of it on hovers just because it's fast enough, but it's not like too squishy. If you know what I mean. It's good all rounder. So I would recommend a beholder if I was getting my first medium cabin in the game. Photon you only really want to use on destructors. If you're like a photon on destructors does a lot of damage. That's what I used in the Battle for Uranium mode. There was a photon in a car. You can use it, but destructors on cars aren't very meta. Only in like low power score. Destructor hover though is fine, to be honest. The photon isn't very fast, but it does a lot of damage. So if you want to use destructors, then use a photon with it. But besides that, I wouldn't recommend it. Nova's not too meta. It hasn't been for a while, to be honest. It's too big to be a good hover cabin. It's too slow as well. You don't want it on a dog for the most part because there's better cabins to use on dogs like griffins and stuff like that. So you don't want it on dogs, and on spider it's a little too squishy for my liking. But there are certain like PC guys who run Novas, but I don't. On PlayStation it just never seems to work, man. You get focused out. Like a good spider team, if you're pushing a Nova Cab, will just focus that Nova Cab. You can ignore the shields or bait it out if you're smart, and then kill you really, really quick. So I wouldn't recommend a Nova. Omnibox is way too fat, way too slow. Perks are good off of it, but don't get it. It's just too big and ponderous. Yes, again, it's too small to be on a spider, but it's too fat and slow to be on a hover, so it's just not useful. Hadron is pretty good. It just buffs reload. It's just a nice cabin to buff on a reload-based weapon. It's too small again to be on a spider, so I wouldn't recommend like a Hadron spider. But a Hadron hover, pretty good because the power is really nice. So if you're on, say, you can have like a Hadron scope hover, a Hadron helican hover, and you're just going to get a reload boost, and it's really nice. Especially on red hovers, because red hovers go 75. You can still get to that speed easily on a Hadron, and it's really good. You just like a flat reload buff is always nice. Right, on to heavy cabins. Echo isn't very good at all, to be honest. It's okay if people are close, you can get a perk, but I do as an epic, it wouldn't be a terrible pick. It's got decent tonnage as well. If I was going for epics in terms of heavy cabs, I would probably go for the Bastion or the Humpback, but the Echo's not a terrible third choice. I wouldn't get it. Its mass is very low for heavy cab, one of the lowest, and the perk is kind of situational. It's not that great in my opinion. I wouldn't bother. Savior's rubbish. It's meant on like fat cars where you crash into someone, do impact damage, and then get a damage buff. But the Humpback is just better for that in my opinion because you get 25% damage once you ram someone. Whereas a humpback, you get 30 damage when you're shot. What's the mass like? You get more mass from a humpback, you get more damage from the humpback. You're going to get shot or take damage when you're in a fat dog because it's a fat dog. It's not as if you can ignore, you can like dodge people. So yeah, the humpback is just better. Icebox is decent. You only really want it on spiders. Actually, to us, all of these heavy cabs, you're gonna want on spiders. You're not, or like fat dogs. You're not gonna see any hovers with these. Or you shouldn't at least. I wouldn't run a hover. Icebox is gonna be like a hover icebox is gonna be way too slow in my opinion. I wouldn't bother. But it's decent on decent for guns where they have limited firing angles. That's basically only things like avalanches, typhoons, tsunamis, stuff like that. There's only 3 guns that are worth running on an icebox, or worth running in Clan Wars in general. Um, so Icebox Typhoon Spider isn't barred at all, to be honest. I wouldn't mind that. If you're running like an Icebox Spider, I would probably pick, no, sorry. If I'm running a Typhoon Spider, I would pick an Icebox over a Whaler, I think, maybe. So you got 19 and 38, so that's 15.2 net, and that's 11.4 net. So you get a decent chunk more health, and you just get a flat out buff. It's a constant 20%. It's not conditional on perk or anything like that. You start the match with a 20% buff, you finish the match with a 20% buff, which is actually really nice. Because when our clan was running Typhoon Spiders for a little bit, I was talking to my clanmate about this, whereby we was having it was like a debate we were running a Typhoon Spider, and we wanted to know what cabin we should run it on. And it was 2 choices, whether our Icebox or you have a Humpback. So a Humpback, obviously, if you take damage, you get a 30% buff at 1,000 damage, which in Spider is like nothing. But we decided that it's better to just have a constant 20% buff from the Icebox, because a smart Spider team, if you're going up against a Humpback Icebox, they're going to ignore you, and then they're going to know you're not going to get that perk, and you're not going to do much damage. With an Icebox Typhoon, you're just going to get the damage the entire time, which is really, really nice. So it's basically, the only thing I would actually recommend it for would be like a Typhoon Spider or like an Avalanche Spider maybe, but still it's not bad. Ermac, I don't really see the point of. I think a Bastion is better. If you're going for like an epic cabin with resistances, I prefer Bastion over an Ermac. The only time an Ermac is better is if you're going up against energy weapons, so say a Helios or a Destructor. But if you are a Bastion going up against a Helios or Destructors or stuff like that, you can just sort of hang back and like let your teammates go in front because you know you're weak to it. But for most situations, I would choose a Bastion over an Ermac personally. Also, Bastion is just bigger and you can hide shit behind the plows. It's really nice for that. Mars, can't really comment. I haven't got it, but it seems very, very good. When I get the Mars, I'm going to try a Reaper Skinner Mars build against Fat Dracos, because the point is, instead of like the Humpback, you can give yourself the damage buff wherever you want, so it's not conditional upon you being shot, which is really nice. And obviously you buff your teammates, so it's just like a support cohort, but for damage. So it looks really good on paper. I'll let you guys know when I actually have it, but it seems very good. Hugging, I don't see the point in it, to be honest. The Hugging 99% of the time. You get like a cooling rate reduction, but for the most part, like damage from the Humpback. Sorry, what I do? No, drop it. There you go. Damage from the Humpback is just better, in my opinion, or like health from the cohort, stuff like that. So I wouldn't get him again ever. Yokozuna is okay on like a Skinner dog, and it can be good. It might be okay to have one Yokozuna in a Spider team if you want to like chase down hovers or anything. If you're all on Biograms and you all get a Yokozuna pick, you can go like 80 kilometers an hour. So it is conditional, but I wouldn't recommend it. That would be for like dedicated Spider teams who are trying to try something out. But for the most part, I'd pick either a Humpback or Cohort over this anytime. Right, there we go. Humpback, which is probably the best epic cabin, just because heavy spiders have a shit ton of HP, so taking 1,000 damage is nothing, and getting a 30% damage buff is very, very good, just in general. So I would pick if I was buying my first epic heavy carbine, I'd pick the humpback every day, and then straight afterwards I'd probably get the bastion for a bit more defense. Basically, you have like the bastion guy out in front, and then you have your DPS. So for us, for example, we will have the Masto on a bastion, or I'll be on a bastion, because the extra damage from the Mastos isn't really the point. The point of my Mastodons is the heat, and our DPS will be either on humpbacks or cohorts. So the enemy team is going to want to focus down our DPS, i.e., our Punishers, to get them off the field, but then they're going to help them by shooting them, and they're going to get a bit of a buff in turn. So, yeah, humpback and cohort are very good. I'd get those two. Sorry, humpback and bastion are very good. I'd get those two. Finally, the cohort. Yeah, very good. There's a hell of a lot of health. You get the perk. There's an important thing to note for the difference between English and Russian speakers is that the cohort, you might not know this from reading the perk, because the perk says that the carbine gets resistances. I'm trying to find a line. Yeah, auto activation gives the carbine 30% damage resist. So, just a bit of history. When this thing first came out, most of the English-speaking Spider players in the game did not use cohort. They pretty much all used bastions, myself included, because we looked at the perk and it says gives the carbine 30% damage resist. Now, if you're a Mastodon Spider like me, it makes a lot more sense for you to have a humpback as opposed to a cohort, because you're going to have the mastodons in front. Do I have a build to show you? No, I don't. Let me show you what I mean. Cohort. Mastodon. Right. So when the game first came out, we would run, say, a build like this, for example, where you've got the mastodons in front of the carbine. So the cohort came out and it said it buffed the carb. So everyone stayed on humpback, because if you shoot at this build, obviously, you're going to shoot the mastodons. You're not going to get any damage resist because it's going to hit your mastodons and not your carbine. Whereas with a humpback, you're going to get the damage buff no matter what. So when the cohort first came out, we thought Mastodon Spiders kind of thought it was pointless, except for the Russian players. All of the Russian players, i.e. Bozo, at the time we were playing against, were running a cohort, and it didn't make any sense. We were like, why the hell are they running on a cohort? Because they're not getting any damage resistance buff. Turns out this is just a complete translation issue because the devs are bloody Russian. The cohort doesn't buff the carbine, the cohort buffs the entire build. So if you hit a cohort perk, you get your entire build gets the damage resistance. So your guns get it, your legs, everything gets it, not just the carbine. It's just a translation mishap. So yeah, that was pretty funny back in the day, but most people know that by now. It's a very good card. You have a lot of health, you have a lot of mass, you can tank for a lot. You get a perk, also gives you to your teammates somewhat, which is also really nice. So having one cohort in a spider team is very good. Finally, Machinist. Machinist isn't very good for the most part, just because he doesn't get any damage buffs or damage resistances. You just get health on your guns, which for the most, since Omomoris come into the game, is kind of situational. Also, the biggest problem with the Machinist is one, its height. It's bloody massive. But also it's the hitbox of stuff in it. Like the frames, for example, need to go around the front, so it's not very helpful. Any guns will need to go on the sides here and here, so you can't get an armor mori on both. If you try to put an armor mori down here, then odds are it's gonna be really difficult to have, say, a gun here and an armor mori and to have the fire angle sorted. So it's not a very good carbine for those reasons on spiders. You get health for your guns, which is obviously nice, but for the most part, spider fights versus spider fights, we just carbine each other most of the time these days, just because it's quicker. That's because of split builds. If anyone's wondering that reason why that is, so say if so you have two guys looking at one enemy, and everyone's on split builds down the middle. You can't both shoot that guy's guns because he's going to be looking at one of your teammates, and the guy he's not looking at can't see his guns. So it just makes a lot more sense for those two teammates, instead of looking at his guns, because only one person can see his guns, to just carbon him instead, because they can both see his carbon. So that's the meta these days. So gun health doesn't really come into it a lot of the times, whereby so that's why machinist just doesn't really get used. If I'm honest, it's much better to have a cohort in most of the sense. Plus, they have very similar masses. The only no, they have exact same masses for the most part. The only advantage you get from the machinist is slightly more tonnage, so you have to run slightly less legs. But even then, your hitbox is enormous, so it's not worth it. So yeah, just to round up, if I was just recommending an epic heavy carbon, it'd be either Humpback or Bastion, depends if you want to do damage or if you want to tank. If I'm going for a legendary heavy carbon, it would either be the Cohort or the Mars, just because, again, you either get damage resist or you get damage. So they both look really good. If I was going for a medium epic, sorry, I would probably go for, any medium epics I kind of like. Howl isn't terrible on a dog, it's like a small buff. Ghost isn't terrible on a hover, to be honest. But again, not so much since the move. You probably just want to go straight to legendary if you can, to be honest. Right, so legendary mediums, I'd go for Whaler if you're on anything regarding a cannon of any sorts. It's pretty good. It's good on hover, it's good on dog. The Hadron is good on hovers as well, just because you get a flat. If you're on a reload-based weapon, the Hadron's never a bad idea. And the Beholder is just a good all-rounder. I really like the Beholder. If I was going for a epic light carbon, I would go for something like Catalina on a hover, just because it is really nice, to be fair. The damage, once you get those stacks up, is really, really good. If you're on a flame build, you get a blight. That's pretty much it, to be fair. If you're going for a legendary light carb, I would have a Griffon. Griffon is very good on firebugs, and it's very good on hover when you got a power fusion as well. So, and on light carb, you're not going to run a spider, obviously. So you want either, if you're getting a light carb, it's either for a dog or hover, and a Griffon would be good on both. So yeah, that's pretty much everything. Is there anything else to say? No. I don't think so. Right, that's it for me. Have a nice weekend, everyone, and I'll catch you for the stream tomorrow morning.